living memories that are better left alone. And we kind of had some fun with that song to think about. Why in the world would we have this book we call Ezekiel in our Bible? And it's exploring a very dark and disturbing time in the people of God's history when God seems to be and says so that He's mad at them and He's let His enemies, let their enemies come in on them and basically have taken Ezekiel and other leaders and other folks away from Jerusalem and sent them off to exile in Babylon. And so wouldn't it have been just better to just leave that memory in the past and not even include it in our Holy Scriptures? But we are discovering a little bit last week, a little bit more this week, and as the weeks go, that we are certainly thankful that it's here, because it not only speaks to the people of God then, but it speaks to us here today, and we're so thankful for that. And we are going to dig up some bones here tonight as well. Oftentimes we think about in our own lives, what are some stories we should share or we shouldn't share, and so I want to tell you about the time that Pastor Melissa and I went to Austria. And this is not a terrible thing that I shouldn't share. It was an embarrassing moment. But we had this wonderful trip to Austria. And I didn't travel at all until I met Pastor Melissa. A big trip for me was from Summit Point to KK, which is outside of Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. So I had never been on an airplane or anything. And basically, she told me if I was going to be with her, I had to go places. And do things. And a few other things in that conversation too, but we'll leave that. We won't dig up those bones. But on this wonderful trip, we rented a car. So here is little old me, haven't been anywhere, and we're here in Europe, and we rent a car. And it's a Renault, and diesel, and a stick shift, and a sporty one at that, and it was awesome. And then we were following a friend. We were staying at a friend's place, and this is before GPS and all that kind of stuff. And he had a Mercedes, a huge Mercedes, with a much bigger engine, and we were following him on the Autobahn. And so that was the fun part of the trip, because we were just going as fast as we could to keep up with this guy. Anyway, one of the particular days we ended up in the city, and we ended up in Vienna, and we were driving in the city trying to figure out where we were going, and we came upon this sign. Now, to me, this sign says open, like the open circle, right? It's a road sign, by the way. It's a road sign, and it looks very welcoming, right? And so I followed that sign with our car right on to a sidewalk. And with people wanting. Because I would have expected a cross lines, saying that would be do not enter, right? I mean, this looks like, come on. Join us here, all the people walking on the sidewalk. So I looked it up just to make sure I was right today. And I got on an Austrian website, and this is the symbol for closed to all vehicles in both directions. But it was just that open circle. And so I missed that sign. And we ended up on the sidewalk. No trouble. I don't think we got in any trouble, but we'll think about that again a little bit later. So Ezekiel, our buddy, when we last left him, was in Babylon. And so he was no longer in Judah and no longer in Jerusalem. He had been taken away in the first wave by the Babylonians. And so he's in modern-day Iraq, if you're thinking about a map. And it's about 600 years before Christ, if you wanted a time period. And he's there along the river, and he gets this vision of the Lord's chariot. And so then, right after the passage we had last week, if you go into chapter 2, he's getting a commission from God. So not only is he a priest by birth, his birth lineage, but now he's also being commissioned as a prophet. And so he's getting his job, and his job is going to be to speak to the people of God and warn them and accuse them. Accuse them of their wrongs, and then warn them that, hey, things are bad now, but they're only going to get worse, and actually everything's going to be destroyed back home. And so he's like, yay, I get to go tell people some more bad news. Ezekiel is now going to begin to do that in the chapters preceding his commission. And so I'm going to go back, and I encourage you to kind of look and read some of this on your own, but I'm going to go back to chapter 4 and go through a couple of his signs of judgment that he's going to give to the people. And he's a little bit dramatic. You know any dramatic people in your life? I know quite a few. And so what he's going to do is really kind of unique. There are some strange characters in the Bible. There are some strange prophets, some of them that don't even wear clothes sometimes when they're being prophetic. And so we're used to hearing some strange things, but this is going to get really odd and really kind of fun. But over the first couple of chapters of these signs and judgments, chapter 4 and 5, he's going to give three main signs that he gets from God through this vision. The first one is he's going to make a model. So that's kind of cool. And so he's going to get like a clay model, and God tells him to do this. So make a clay model of the city of Jerusalem, and make it pretty and build the walls and all that kind of stuff. And then as people are gathering, destroy it. And so he's like a 5-year-old little boy. He gets to play with clay, and he gets to destroy it. And so that's not too crazy, but it is. He's acting this out in front of everybody, and so it's kind of a warm-up. And then the next one is really odd. He's going to act as if, and this is the middle picture where he's tied up, and these are from the Bible Project, by the way. I did not make these. The Bible Project is a really cool online tool for studying Scripture. But anyway, the one where he's tied up there, he's going to act as if he is the scapegoat. And so that's like he's sacrificing himself. And that's from the old stories in the Old Testament, where once a year, the goat goes out into the wilderness and dies for the sins of the people. And so he's basically acting as if he's doing that. And he's going to be out there for a long, 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 long time. Lying there on his left side first. And then he's going to set the whole guilt of the house of Israel on him. For the length of time you lie on your side, you will bear their punishment. And then you're going to flip over and be on your right side to bear the guilt for the house of Judah. And so that's the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And then appoint 40 days to you, 1 day for each year, with your arms stretched out. So this is an extended time. Face the siege of Jerusalem directly and prophesy against it. Then you're going to gather some wheat and barley, beans, and lentils. So he's getting some food together. And millet and spelt. That sounds like a delicious dinner, right? It's only going to get better. Put them in a bowl and make your bread for... That sounds like when mom decides to cook dinner, doesn't it? I mean, all those healthy ingredients, barley and lentils and beans, they prefer my sports bar menu. But anyway, eat it during the 390 days that you lie on your side. And oh, by the way, you're going to cook this by using human waste. So the fuel for the fire that you're making this cake in the pot is going to be by human waste. Now, he does push back on that a little bit. He's like, come on, that's nuts. That's crazy. And then God answers him. So we said this is beside the point of the message for tonight, but it's kind of an invitation for us to be in real communication with God, because God actually listens to his lament here and answers him. He says, okay, Ezekiel, I'll let you use cow dung instead. And so he gets to cook with cow dung instead of human waste. And so they kind of meet halfway. And so then the third one was, I want you to take a blade and chop off all your hair. And then lay it out on the ground, and you're going to divide it with a sword. You're going to slice your hair up into threes, and you're going to have some fun with that. And so, just really three bizarre ways to start these signs of and judgments against Israel. And that's how Ezekiel gets started with this. Well, about a year goes on. About a year later, he starts to have another vision. And this time, he is kind of transported back to Israel, like in his vision. So not really, but he's transported back in time and place to Israel, to the temple. And then so God's kind of being his tour guide here in the vision, and he points out, look what the leaders of the temple. So these are the priests and the other leaders that are there, and they built a big idol. It kind of looks like a cow's head on top. They're worshiping an idol right there in the front of the gate of the temple. And then he says, look at the women over here. The women over here, they're worshiping one of Baal's gods, Tammuz, whatever. And then they're doing crazy, terrible things within the temple as well. And so that's an issue. And then what he sees after that is, through this, he sees that Lord's chariot again. And it's described there again for him as we get closer to the passage that was read for us today. And so in chapters 9 and 10, we hear of the Lord's chariot again. And he actually sees it leaving the temple. And so because of the idolatry, basically, God is leaving the temple is where that goes. And so in a very, he's very distraught and saddened by this, but he sees in this vision the Lord's chariot leave. And so that's how we find that we find that he actually, how God ends up in Babylon with them. And then on top of all this, what we discover is God even tells Ezekiel, hey, and by the way, you're going to do all this work and no one's going to listen to you. And so after all of this, Ezekiel has the job that he has to do and the prediction from God that, hey, you're going to do all this work on my behalf and nobody's going to listen. And so destruction is coming. And so that is the really, really bad news. And so these people in God, in Israel, they don't get these signposts. They don't get it. They don't get, even before Ezekiel starts to lay down in the street, even before Ezekiel starts to chop off all his hair, even before Ezekiel starts to cook with cow dung, God's destroying and God's distributing people all around the region. God's letting their enemies come in and disrupt their way of life, and they're not getting it. They don't get it. And then even as they're exiled, and they feel like they're alone, but they don't get it. They don't see the signs that God is angry with them because they have denied Him, because they have aligned with the wrong people, because they're worshiping idols. They don't get it. And so Ezekiel here is commissioned. Now, the one fun part about, and Cindy was trying to get to the end of the story before I wanted to get to the end of the story. When we were on this sidewalk in Austria, in Vienna, we saw a cop. And he was on the sidewalk as well, walking. Yeah, oops. And I don't know what he was thinking. And the way I remember it, maybe Pastor Melissa remembers it differently, but I think he was actually smiling. And he pointed us off the sidewalk, as if we didn't know we needed to get off the sidewalk. But pointed us the way that we could get off the sidewalk, and maybe, I don't remember for sure, but maybe he even stopped traffic so we could get off of his sidewalk and not kill anybody at the moment.
And move away from the train.
What's that?
And move away from that
Yes,
train.
the tram that was coming towards us, get away from that as well. But he performed a very important role in interpreting the sign that I had missed. And so if we think about Ezekiel's role in this, and when he's doing all these crazy type of signs, his ultimate role is going to be, as a prophet, to interpret them. And so he's going to be like the traffic cop there, directing us, pointing us, and saying, "Hey, if you didn't get our sign, because you're probably a crazy American, but let me point you in the right direction." Ezekiel is going to do this all along the way here in this book. And in fact, God's going to tell him what to say. So God doesn't just say, lay there in the street and just make a clay model. He tells him, no, tell the people what this sign is going to be. This is a sign for the house of Israel that's going to fall. And so when he talks about cooking with the cow dung, he says, tell them I'm destroying the food supply in Jerusalem, and they will anxiously ration and eat their food. And so he explains the sign. He performs the sign, and then he explains it with prophetic words from God. When he does his hair, he talks about, tell them what is going to happen. You have become more turbulent, and give them you have been more turbulent than these nations around you, and talk about all the division that is coming behind this. And then when it gets to the temple vision, it's not just a vision that he sees and something that he has to hold himself, but the Lord speaks to him and tells him what it is and how to interpret it to the people. And so why are we digging up these bones of Ezekiel, all these terrible images and all this stuff about sin and idolatry and all these things that they don't make us feel very good about ourselves, because we know Ezekiel is talking to the people of God, but we also know that some of these things that they're being accused of, like having idols or listening to other people other than God, we know those kinds of things hit kind of close to home for ourselves. And so we'd rather not dig up those bones or exhume those memories. We leave them, they're better left alone, right? And so, but these words then, from God, these prophetic words speak to us. And so that's why it's important not just to have the signs, but also to have the words that describe them. And so we need to go back and we need to read them. And so it is that this chapter 11 that was read for us tonight, this beginning of chapter 11, we find out how it is that God has left the temple. And so in a really strange way, we get there from chapter 4 to chapter 11 that we have read for us. And so again, we know why, because we get to hear some of this story about how it happened. We know it hits close to home. There's also going to be a hint of good news here. You can't just leave it all dark and disturbing and all this stuff about destruction and death. That wouldn't be any way to spend our Thursday night together. So what's the good news? The good news we discover here is that God's not finished talking here in chapter 11. He's going to go on further as this chapter ends, and we're going to discover that God hasn't abandoned his people at all. So God left the temple, but God has actually gone into exile with his people. All right? And so they might be feeling like God has abandoned them, And God's going to say right here through the prophet Ezekiel, that's not the case. God's actually going on this trip with you, even into exile. And then further, and maybe even more importantly, the end of chapter 11, we hear that God is going to give a glimmer of hope here by saying he is going to save a remnant. A remnant will return with new and transformed hearts. And so chapter 11 becomes a hinge that's going to point us in a new direction. And we're going to have some details of the destruction of the temple and of Jerusalem. We're actually going to talk about that next week. But we're getting a clue here before we get into the down and dirty of the destruction of the temple and the walls. We're getting a clue that out onto the other side, we're going to have some transformation. And so we never want to read this stuff without any hope. We get some big time hope here that not only has God not abandoned the people, but there's going to be some possibility for some transformation. And if the people's hearts will go from hard to soft, a transplant from having a hard heart to a new heart, then there's going to be some good news. And so Ezekiel points them towards that as well. And so it ends in a very, very positive and hopeful way with Ezekiel saying and pointing towards the hope that comes from having a transformed heart. As we